Well, there's not going to be any woodworking in this, so we'll be wood burning once I'm done. I'm building a wood burning grill. I've got the grill made already, actually. That's the first thing that I did. I figured it's best to get the size of this down first, because really this is the material that I'm limited by, because I've only got so many of these things here. These are stainless steel rods that I had a bunch of. These are actually from Panic Hardware, left over, that I've had for several years. I'm trying to find a use for them. So I figured this is a good one. The first thing that I did to build this was I cut all of the rods to the same length. These were 37 inches long to begin with. I cut them exactly in half, or as close as I could. And then I cut the end bars, which are just pieces of steel that are 1/8 of an inch thick, 3/4 of an inch wide. And then I started welding the rods onto that, and I spaced them 3/8 of an inch apart. I've had a few comments on my other videos where I've used this welding machine. People wondering where's the shroud for the tip. I'm not using gas with this machine. I'm using flux core wire, and that doesn't need gas. It's great for doing this kind of welding, which is kind of rough. The wire itself is a bit more expensive, but then you don't need gas. You don't need to, worry about that, going and get your bottle filled up or whatever. This wire thickness is 30 thousandths, and that's generally what I use, either that or 35 thousandths, and that gives me really good penetration. That's another benefit with this type of wire. You'll actually get better penetration with this than you will with regular MIG wire and gas. You don't have to worry about wind blowing the gas away or anything like that either. I'm more or less just tacking these bars on. They don't have to be welded all the way around because they're not going to see any stress. Now, like I said, these bars are stainless steel, but the end pieces are regular mild steel. But I've never had a problem welding these two together, and they'll hold just fine. I'm not going to go overboard with the grinding on this, more or less just trying to get the spatter off. I'll go over the whole thing after with a wire brush in the grinder. I'm not a big believer in grinding down welds, especially for something like this. I'm not looking to win any beauty awards with this. All I'm concerned with is that the welds are strong enough to hold it together. And so with the grill itself done, I can start working on the tray. I've got a piece of 1/4 inch steel here. This was also free. I got, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago from a job. It was supposed to go in to close off a wall, and they used something else, and this was going to go into the dumpster, believe it or not. So I took it, and the one drawback with it is that it's got a piece of steel tubing on this side, but that's just tacked in over here, and all I need to do is cut those tacks off, and that'll come right off of there. Yeah, that was easy enough. This is nice and straight. I'll probably find a use for this too on something. Well, this is really thick walled stuff, really heavy. Put it in the shed. The piece of 1/4 inch steel is 16.5 inches wide, 73 inches long. I'll get more than enough to do this out of this. Just lining up the grill on the piece, and I'm just going to make a mark here. I could cut this with the angle grinder with the zip cut blade, but it would take long. This is 1/4 inch steel, and also I'd go through a few blades, I think, and I've got a lot of cutting to do. So I've gotten out the plasma cutter, and I've clamped a straight edge on here, which is just a framing square, and that'll be the guide for this little ring that's on here, and I'm going to run up against that. And I'm going to try to cut through this in one pass. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with this machine, so hopefully it goes well. Gets kind of hung up on the, this is actually primed, so that thing doesn't move as smoothly as it could. I got some places where the cut is really clean, and then other places where it kind of got hung up. But overall, yeah, a pretty nice straight cut. So happy with that. A lot faster than the grinder too. It's getting a bit late. I've been out here cooking in the sun all day, but I want to get the sides and the front and back cut out before I call it an evening anyway. So I've already marked everything out here and lined up my squares as straight edge to make the first cut. I did manage to get everything cut out that evening, but then the next day when I wanted to start again, it was raining, so that put a damper on that. The next day also, it was pretty wet again this morning, so I didn't know if I was actually going to get anything done today. So it's pretty late in the day again, but I'm going to start by cleaning up the pieces that I cut already. I often get criticized for not wearing protective equipment or guards on the grinder or whatever. Anybody that knows me knows my hearing is pretty much blown out. So I got to try to protect the little bit that I have left. If I have one word of advice to young people that are getting into this kind of thing, especially around tools like this that make a lot of steady noise like this, like a grinder will, is to wear some sort of hearing protection, because I think that 90% of my hearing loss is related just to using that tool alone. Well, I've got everything cleaned up and laid out here, ready to weld together. First thing I'm going to do is just tack everything in place, and then I'm going to fully weld it afterwards. Try to get everything lined up as best I can right now. Okay, so I got the box tacked together. I'm calling it a box. It is the tray. And when I cut the pieces out, they bowed a little bit, which is to be expected. And so to pull them in tight, I'm just going to clamp it up and put another tack in the middle. Now that I got it all tacked up, I can start welding all the seams. I just want to watch it to make sure that it doesn't get distorted. You'll notice that I'm wearing a little bit more protective gear now that I'm actually doing some welding. I typically wear a helmet when I'm tacking, but often it's just quicker to quickly do it with your eyes closed. And that's the way it goes. Like I say, you're not going to bother to gear up for every single shot, especially when you're just tacking something together. You got to remember that when you're watching a video, you're actually only just watching little bits and pieces of the build, and it's really very inconvenient to gear up for every shot like that. For these long seams across the bottom, I'm not going to do the whole thing at the same time. I'm going to weld a strip about 3 inches long, and then I'll move to another place. And that way I hope I can avoid distorting the tray too much.